Achieving Security Resilience. This is a result of our latest Security Outcomes Report, Volume 3. All right, let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity versus cyber resilience or cybersecurity resilience. And so cybersecurity is that strategy that we've been doing for a very, very long time, right? It's all about prevention and risk reduction. It's the ability to prevent data breach or reduce the risk of malicious intent. And impacts include things like service disruption, reputational damage. You also get huge fines from regulatory bodies. But these are things that we've been doing a long time. The challenge here is that prevention is never going to be 100%. Doesn't matter on the vendor, doesn't matter on the processes and the people. At one point in time, you will be compromised. And so that's really where cyber resilience starts to come in. It's the strategy that helps drive towards mitigating the impacts of an adversarial attack, but this also includes adversarial threats, such as human and programmatic errors. Now we know this, right? Think about cloud service providers, right? It's highly available, multiple availability zones within multiple regions. But if there is a configuration change in that environment that may have long-reaching impact, and that's the only cloud service provider you have, well, you may not be that resilient. We can also look at it as a massive network outage with a large ISP that has multiple functions within your business. It could be part of your payment system. It could be part of the networks in the business that operates on. And if they make a change to, say, BGP, for example, and cause massive disruption and outage, well, then your business is not very resilient, is it? So mitigations include being able to continuously provide services during a service disruption. Now, organizations require both in order to be secure and resilient. So why focus on security outcomes? Well, because we know there's plenty of other cybersecurity reports that are available in the market today. We wanted to drive towards the practices that lead to outcomes to implement cybersecurity strategy. So this is the third security report in a series. And so the first one was what works in security. And this is really around security practices that lead to better outcomes. And then we've got the deep dive into top 5 practices. And this includes things like proactive technology refresh, well-integrated technology, timely incident response, prompt disaster recovery, and accurate threat detection. In fact, if you look at some of these, they certainly can help drive resilience. And then the third, the one that we're here for today, the ability to protect the integrity in every aspect of the business so we can withstand, not just survive, unpredictable threats or changes, and ultimately emerge stronger. And Scientia was the one that performed the survey. And so they reached out to security practitioners across the globe, 4,700 respondents. So this is not a small survey of 200. This is a fairly large survey, and it reached 26 countries. Now, it was a double-blind survey. So what that means is that Cisco did not know the customers being surveyed, and the customer did not know Cisco was asking the questions. Again, it's fairly diverse. It's all industries and all organizational sizes. And so we're going to talk about 3 core things: why security resilience, the impact for organizations, and the success factor. Then we'll show you a little bit around the alignment with NIST and how it can help drive towards resilience as well. So why is security resilience important? Well, as I mentioned, you can't prevent 100% of everything 100% of the time. And so therefore, there will be impact. But how important it is to the folks that we've surveyed. 96% of executives place a high priority on security resilience. And then we have 62% of those organizations experienced a security event that impacted resilience. That might fuel why it's a high priority for many of those executives. They've been through an incident. And what are some of those incidents? Well, network or data breach, network or system outage, and then ransomware event. There's communication interruption, supply chain disruption, impaired internal operation, lasting brand damage, and more. And so when we look at the impact of security resilience, we see in our survey a couple of things. The first 2 seem to line up with the classic definition of risk. probability, and impact. So preventing major security incidents and losses, and then mitigating financial losses from security incidents. Number 3 is adapting to unexpected external change events or trends. Now, this one's interesting, and we could make an opinion here that maybe COVID drove this to number 3. We know there was a major push to ensure business maintained operations when COVID kicked in. It was the largest proof of concept in IT ever, and that was work from home. And we accelerated the adoption of cloud services. We accelerated the move to be able to work from home. And security took a back seat a little bit here too. And then the last one, recruiting and retaining talented security personnel. We know that this is an issue in cybersecurity specifically. It's interesting how it plays a role in resilience. And we're going to talk about why it's difficult to retain talented security personnel. So let's dig into this a little bit and look at the differences between CISOs and directors and security professionals and what they think around the importance of these outcomes. And so CISOs and directors look at mitigating losses, containing incidents, and keeping up with the business as items 1, 2, and 3. Mitigating losses is the number 1 priority. But when we look at security professionals, mitigating losses is number 2, and then containing incidents and keeping up with the business drop to 5 and 6. In fact, security pros look at preventing incidents as their number 1 priority, and CISOs and directors certainly see that as number 4. Now, we know that there's sometimes a difference here between leadership and the folks that are actually delivering on the services. But alignment is key here, and it will help drive towards better outcomes. Now, this is what's interesting here. Recruiting and retaining talented security personnel drives right to the top. Now, you can see that this is broken up by size of organization. So we start at 50 to 249, and then all the way up to 10,000 plus. Number 1, again, is recruiting and retaining talented security personnel is tough business. And so I think that is inevitable with the shortage in the market, and we're taking people and we're moving them into roles and we're accelerating their training and hoping to support the initiatives that the organization has. But some of this makes me think a little bit about why this might be happening. And one of it might be the complexity of environments. And so if you are a security professional and you feel like you're not moving the needle and you're fighting fires all the time, or the complexity in the environment makes it very, very difficult to drive change and outcomes, then you're more apt to maybe move on. Not to mention the lack of skills that are required to be proficient. Regardless, it's number 1. Mitigating and financial losses stemming from a security incident. Now, this one changes depending on the size of the organization. So it's the bottom for organizations from 50 to 249. That might be because they just don't have the dollars to spend. And therefore, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, potentially, to invest those dollars into mitigating risk when the business isn't worth that money already. Then you've got 250 to 499. It jumps up to 7, then goes to 5, and then all the way up to number 3 for 1,000 to 9,999, and then drops down to 10,000. Now, this one's interesting as well because, it might be due to the fact that these organizations of this size have the financial backing in case of security incidents. It's about understanding the financial risk to the organization and making a decision on that. Now, what are some of the success factors to improve security resilience? So how do we move from bottom 10% to the top 10%? And so some of this is pretty obvious. Establish executive support. When you have executive buy-in, you certainly can help drive towards the outcome much easier. Cultivate a culture of security. Hold resources in reserve. Simplify hybrid cloud environments. Maximize zero trust adoption. Extend detection and response capabilities. And then take security to the edge. So if you drive towards these 7 success factors, we see that the average score increases when it comes to resilience. We're going to drill into each one of these a little bit more. So you get a 39% increase when you establish executive support. Now we know this. If you have executive buy-in, you're going to be able to drive the project to completion. And so, for example, one of the business drivers could be as simple as, look, we want to have the best people in the world to support our business. We want to hire them from anywhere. So that might mean that you have to drive towards a work from home or hybrid based work policy. And if you're driving security outcomes that achieve that goal of hybrid work, certainly you're going to get some success here. And that might also help the other issue with retainment of personnel. If people had the flexibility to work from the places they love, then they may be more apt to stick around. When it comes to cultivate a culture of security, it increases 46%. Make sure that employees are treated as part of the solution rather than the problem. So training is still there. It doesn't go away. That's something that we have to do. But I got thinking about this a little bit. How do we get people really thinking about security all the time? And so, one way of doing this might be is that you create a community within the organization. Again, I'm thinking out loud here, where you start showcasing why parents and people without children might want to consider how to secure their home environment and why. And that way you can translate it to the things that we're doing in the business. They'll be thinking about security a little bit differently because they're securing their environment. For example, if you have a teenager that's going to the internet and downloads some files that they think that they're installing on a particular asset, there's reasons why you want antivirus and some protection mechanisms because that payload that they download might be malicious. Start there. So when they're in the office, they start applying some of those practices in the office environment as well. Everybody has a role. We all know this. So this is an increase of 46%. Now hold resources in reserve for incident response. This one's key. If you're running full tilt 100% of the time, your teams are going to be burned out by the time an incident comes. And so you want some flexibility in that schedule. You want to make sure that there's some time allotted for an incident throughout the week. Now, this could just be a placeholder where you can shift and move things around in the schedule, but make sure that you do have a window of opportunity where you can now, if an incident happens on Monday, even though the individual has a bunch of projects in line, we can shift those easily into that open slot, and then we can start dealing with the incident itself. So when we break this down, we start seeing a 11% increase with external resources. So if you can't have that flexibility in the schedule, then you might want some incident response services to help augment the team. And if you have both, you get an additional 13%. So we go 15 with flexibility in your schedule and opening up availability for your internal staff to support an incident. You augment that with incident response services, which gives you an increase of 11%. And obviously, if you have both, you get a further increase of 13%. Now, this one's interesting, simplifying cloud environments. So when you look at the top two, if you have a traditional on-premise environment or you have mostly cloud, your resilient numbers aren't too bad, right? They're high in comparison to, these hybrid environments. And so I have an opinion on some of why this happens is because of the complexity. And again, I think that's an impact to retaining and security personnel as well. The more complicated the environment is, the more likely people aren't going to stick around for long. And so when you think of hybrid cloud, you have to think about the complexity and nuance in every single cloud service provider. For example, cloud service provider A will have security controls, and a lot of them are easy to enable. Click, 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 and you're done. The problem is that there's specific nuance in how they deliver those services. And then you go to cloud service provider B, and again, click, 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 it's enabled. And again, there's nuance in the way those security controls operate and are managed. And then you've got your on-premise environment. So this multi-cloud, multi-IT environment becomes very complex. How do you become proficient in all these different ways of driving towards outcomes? And certainly becomes challenging. So cloud-heavy organizations see a plus 15%. You got traditional deployment see plus 15%. Remember, if you're one or the other, early stage hybrid actually sees a drop of 14%. And then extensive hybrid is on par with cloud heavy and traditional. But the key here is simplifying management. So, as an example, if you have the ability to take telemetry from the network and run it through a behavioral analytics platform, then you probably want a platform that empowers you to be able to drive that outcome in your cloud service provider A and B as well. Or maybe even a simpler example. You have next-gen firewall on your internet gateway in your data center within your traditional on-premise environment. It might make sense to extend that capability in your cloud service provider A and B and have one management plane for everything that you do to remove risk when leveraging something like a next-generation firewall. 30% when we maximize zero trust adoption. Now, I think this one's pretty obvious, right? If you can do zero trust, and zero trust is a framework, not a product, and there's going to be multiple policy decision points. These are the engines that understand policy and drive that policy into what we call our policy enforcement points. So this could be driving an outcome in your switch infrastructure, right? Or your firewalls. This could be driving an outcome within your user device and application. This could be driving an outcome on your workloads within your data center. But we certainly know that zero trust reduces the attack surface and ultimately shrinks the blast radius. So when you're impacted, you certainly continue to be resilient because you've minimized the exposure. And so we see a 30% increase. A first step in that journey might be something as simple as verifying users and devices through multi-factor authentication. That's an 11% increase. Now, there's some things with multi-factor authentication. You want to make sure that you don't get MFA fatigue, or some call it push fatigue. That's where an adversary may steal credentials, log in to an application, you get the push notification, and they keep doing it until you hit yes. And so you want layers to protect against that and certainly minimize your risk and exposure there as well. And then start looking at driving towards microsegmentation of your workloads and within your campus environment. Now, 45% increase with extended detection and response capability. Again, I think this makes a little bit of sense here, because if I'm able to automate, detect, analyze, hunt, and remediate with rich context, then I'm more apt to bring back operations sooner. So organizations that report rolling endpoint detection response increase by 23%. And then if you have basic extended detection response, we add another 10%, which gives you 33%. And then organizations with all of these capabilities, jump up to that full 45%. So there's a little bit of a journey here that you can take. If you're not doing extended detection response, that's probably something that you want to look at. The problem with endpoint detection response is that you might know that it was Outlook with a attachment that was executed by a user that leveraged a macro, that used PowerShell, that went to a bad site, it pulled down a file, and it was executed and started automatically. And that's great, but do you know what email it came in from? So that's where extended detection response starts to come in and give you better context, as well as endpoint detection response is only as good as the asset it's installed on. And we know organizations now have a tremendous amount of IoT-based devices in their environment that you're not installing an agent on. And so again, having some network detection response capability feeding into your extended detection response platform is certainly going to be relevant. 27% take security to the edge. So, and if you have extended detection response, we're starting to see that SASE deployments exhibit overall security resilience scores on an average of 15%. Now, interesting with SASE, you're starting to see the industry shift a little bit of saying, you know what, taking SASE and breaking them apart, having the access done by one vendor and the security controls by another, probably is adding complexity to the environment. And a single vendor solution should certainly be considered here, regardless of the vendor. But the bottom line is that you've got to always think about the complexity that you might be adding to an environment when you're driving towards some of these outcomes. So again, this is all about secure access services edge, driving the convergence of networking and security into the cloud. And the goal here is to simplify operations and ultimately remain resilient. This is an increase of 27%. So when we ask executives their top 3 initiatives, these are the top 3. Multi-factor authentication tops out at number 1. Endpoint detection response, number 2. Zero trust access is number 3. Now, some of these might be pretty quick to deploy, like multi-factor authentication. Depending on the technology stack, you might be able to drive that outcome a little faster for a subset of your core application. So always think about the 80% use case and drive towards that, significantly reducing your risk. Endpoint detection response, that's touching every endpoint, so there's a little bit more of a lift there. Zero trust access model, well, you never ever 100% achieve that, but there's some opportunity there to significantly reduce risk and add zero trust to an environment. And then number 4 is extended detection response, and then it goes all the way down to, offline or air-gapped backups and things like that. But again, take a look at the report and digest it. Now, as we start closing out here, we look at how is security resilience and NIST framework align. So we know about identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And so what we've done is that we've made this matrix where we've taken NIST elements and aligned them to outcomes that certainly help drive towards resilience. And so if you look at people that do a great job of keeping track of key systems and data, are almost 11% more likely to excel at containing the spread and scope of a security incident. So again, you can work through this list here and see the opportunity to, again, follow the NIST framework and where you might be increasing or improving your ability to be resilient. And remember, cybersecurity resilience is key to every other resiliency program that you might have in the organization. Supply chain, financial, that none of those can be driven without a cybersecurity resilience program supporting them. So we've covered why security resilience. Again, you can't protect 100% of everything. We talked about the impact of organizations and the success factors, and then we discussed a little bit of the alignment with NIST. Now, there's a couple of other things that I want to call out here. We have some thought leadership around security resilience for the government. There's a link here. I'll put it in the comment section as well. It really drives home the need for zero trust, but it's a great article. Have a look at it. So the Cyber Resilience Workshop. Now, this one's great because it's really hands-on. It's really for the practitioner, but it drives home the adversarial approach as well as the defensive capabilities that are required to mitigate that risk. That obviously supports resiliency. So again, it's going through each one of these systematically and truly understanding the risk to the organization. Now go ahead and download the security outcomes report and the other reports I mentioned earlier. There's some good data in here. There's lots of stuff that I didn't talk about that certainly would be relevant to your organization.